This, then, is the metaphysical theory of the state. It is the endeavour to exhibit the fabric of society in a light in which we shall see it, in or through its actual condition, as the incarnation of something very great and glorious indeed, as one expression of that supreme being which some of these thinkers call the spirit and others the absolute. There is no question here of realizing an ideal by human effort. We are already living in the ideal. It does not much matter whether we are rich or poor, healthy or enfeebled, personally aware of happiness or misery. Nay, it does not seem to matter very much whether we are just or unjust, virtuous or depraved, for we are all integral parts in something much wider and nobler than the individual life, something to which mere human good and evil, happiness or misery, are small matters, mere constituent elements that, whatever they may be for each one of us, play their part right well in the magnificent whole. Evil is indeed necessary to good. It is a part of the perfection of the absolute, and anything which would point to its exaltation as an ideal is condemned, as an offshoot of popular notions of progress, or ridiculed as a piece of humanitarian enthusiasm. Such then is the spirit of the metaphysical theory of society which I propose to examine in the shape given to it by its founder Hegel and its most modern and most faithful exponent Dr. Bosanquet. This theory is commonly spoken of as idealism, but it is in point of fact a much more subtle and dangerous enemy to the ideal than any brute denial of idealism emanating from a one-sided science. Against every attempt to construe the world as mere fact which we cannot modify, there will always spring up the reaction of human hope, of human endeavour, of the deep-seated indignation at injustice, the rebel passion of pity. If the scientific man insists that as this world rose out of the whirl of atoms, agitated by mechanical forces, so it will ultimately disappear in the cold and darkness, nonetheless men will say, "Here we are, conscious living beings, palpitating with emotion, with feeling, products it may be of your whirl of atoms, yet allowed meanwhile some latitude to shape our lives, to avoid the worst evils and to cultivate some fleeting happiness. Let us at least stand together against this unkindly fate and make the best of life while we can, not only for our short-lived selves, but for our feeble race." Thus, mechanical science stimulates at least the ethics of revolt. But when we are taught to think of the world, which we know as a good world, to think of its injustices, wrongs, and miseries as necessary elements in a perfect ideal, then, if we accept these arguments, our power of revolt is atrophied, our reason is hypnotized, our effort to improve life and remedy wrong fade away into a passive acquiescence in things as they are, or, still worse, into slavish adulation of the absolute in whose hands we are mere pawns. These, it may be said, are the questions of general rather than social philosophy. But the point is that to the idealistic school, social philosophy is an application of the theory of the absolute to human affairs. As Dr. Bosanquet tells us, reference The Principle of Individuality and Value, page 311, the treatment of the state in this discussion is naturally analogous to the treatment of the universe. The happiness of the state is not to be judged by the happiness of the individual. The happiness of the individual must be judged by the goodness of the state. It is to be valued by the perfection of the whole to which he belongs. In the conception, therefore, of the state as a totality, which is an end in itself, an end to which the lives of men and women are mere means, we have the working model of an absolute. For the thoroughgoing idealist, all the conscious beings that live under the shadow of the Absolute seem to have just as much or as little title to independent consideration as the cells of the human body. Now for Hegel, the state is a form of the Absolute Spirit, which is the essence of all things. The state is the divine idea as it exists on earth. Reference: Philosophy of History, E.T., page 41. 4. Quote, all the worth which the human being possesses, all spiritual reality, he possesses only through the state. Reference: Ibid, page 40, F. The state is the spirit which stands in the world and realizes itself therein consciously. Ellipsis. The existence of the state is God's movement in the world. Reference: Philosophie des Rechts, pages 312 to 13. The state is the divine will as the present spirit unfolding itself to the actual shape and organization of a world. Philosophie des Rechts, page 327. It is the absolute power upon earth, page 417. It's its own end, Selbstzweck. It is the ultimate end which has the highest right against the individual, whose highest duty is to be a member of the state. The method followed by this theory is not ethical because it does not seek to find reasons for human conduct in any ultimate goal of human endeavour, or in any rational principle of human duty. It does not seek these because it denies that the reflective reason of the individual is the method by which truth about ideals is to be ascertained. All true ideals are actual. They belong to what is called the objective mind. They are incarnated in the laws, traditions, customs of the society to which we belong. Nor again is the method scientific. It is neither historical nor statistical. It does not concern itself with the varying forms of social institutions, nor with the correlations of coexistence or succession. It assumes certain abstract conceptions. Note, not that they are admitted to be abstract, they are believed by the idealist to be the very soul of reality. See, e.g., Philosophie des Rechts, page 58. And expounds them dogmatically in general terms, putting aside the appeal to experience. If actual societies differ from the idealistic conception of them, so much the worse for those societies. Thus, the centre of the discussion is the state, as though there were precisely one and only one type of social organizations to which the name applies, and which can be described without reference to experience in universal terms. Dr. Bosanquet, in his latest restatement, justifies this procedure. The state, he tells us, is a brief expression for states qua states. Reference: Social and International Ideals, 1917, page 274. Now, it may be perfectly true that there are propositions which hold of states as such, distinguishable from propositions which hold of some states and not of others. But the urgent question for any science is how such general truths are arrived at. Is it by induction, a comparison of states from which the points of agreement and difference may emerge? No such inductive process is to be found in the metaphysical theory. Is it by self-evidence? Is it, for example, self-evident that state represents differentiations of a single human spirit, ellipsis, whose extent and intensity determine and are determined by territorial limits? Reference: Ibid, page 275. Is this a proposition which commands acceptance by intuition like a mathematical axiom? If not, on what evidence is it based? When Hegel asserts that the state must have a monarch to complete its personality, and that monarch must be determined by a natural method, and this is primogeniture, are these self-evident propositions? Do they rest on intrinsic necessities revealed to Hegel's intuition, or do they really do no more than clothe the practice of the Prussian state in sounding generalities. The truth is that in social investigation, large and unproven principles are apt to be either mere generalizations of customs or institutions which happen to be familiar to the writer, or expressions of his ideals, or very possibly a fusion of the two. Dr. Bosanquet thinks that his critics, dealing unguardedly, quote, with states, unquote, positively wandering off into the region of fact, quote, attribute to states that which qua states they are not, namely defects which the state organization exists to remove. For him, the state is the power which, as the organization of the community, quote, has the function of maintaining the external conditions necessary to the best life, end quote. If one objects that many states maintain conditions that are quite adverse to the best life, Dr. Bosanquet retorts that we must distinguish a function from its derangement. States qua states do not maintain bad conditions. It results that the state is not the actual organized community, but only so much of the organized community as makes for good. This is to define the state as an ideal. But elsewhere, reference, The Philosophical Theory of the State, page 186, Dr. Bosanquet defines the state as that society, quote, which is habitually recognized as the unit lawfully exercising force, end quote. A definition which would apply to the rule of the Tsar or Sultan. The second definition is much nearer to common usage, which certainly thinks of the state as an organization which may serve good or bad ends, maintain good or bad conditions, but is a state as long as it holds together and maintains law and government. It is a violent departure from usage, which at best would only lead to constant misunderstanding, to restrict the term to the good elements of any such organization. But things are still worse if the state means at one time that which is actually common to stable political organizations, and at another the ideal functions of a possible political organization. Note: it may be permissible to define a structure by its function, provided the definition be unambiguous. For this purpose, the structure must only have one function, and we must know what it is, and that it is invariably performed. If every government performed the function of promoting the common good, and no other, there would be no harm in defining the state as that which exists for the common good. But if, e.g., the state is in the hands of a governing class which governs for selfish ends, it does not perform this function. Do we then mean by the state the organization which sustains government, or the organization which sustains a peculiar kind of government aiming at a particular kind of purpose? If the latter, we must get another name instead of the state for every actual organization, insofar as it deflects from our ideal. Otherwise, we shall never know whether we are talking about the ideal world or the real world. End note. Such methods of definition are equally fatal to science and philosophy, and our general charge against the method of idealism must be that it starts with and never corrects the fundamental confusion of the ideal and the actual. Note: the truth seems to be that the idealists suppose actual states to be so good that the error is insignificant. Thus Hegel interrupts one of his rhapsodies, Philosophie des Rechts, page 313, with the caution: in the idea of the state one must not have particular states before one's eyes, nor particular institutions. One must rather treat the idea of this actual God on its own account. For the moment, the reader thinks that after all Hegel has only been romancing harmlessly about an ideal world. But he goes on. Every state, though one may recognize this or that fault in it, has always, especially when it belongs to developed states of our own time, the essential moments of its existence in itself. The God, it seems, is actually incarnated in actual states, though it seems to have some little trouble in the flesh. There is a case for restricting the use of the term state to those political organizations which recognize the rule of law and some measure of self-government. The present writer has used the term in this sense, Morals in Evolution, Chapter 2. But this still defines the state by actual and assignable features of its organization, not by the way in which that organization performs its functions, and the term state is in practice used by many writers in a much wider sense as applicable to all communities that possess an organized government. In the Hegelian state in particular, though the reign of law is certainly postulated, there is no notion of self-government.